They came to be seen, 30 ships, one silent forest, and a plan that had never failed. But Switzerland's Jura mountains do not applaud. Something was already watching them from the limestone above. It had no roar, no army, and no name the invaders could pronounce. The researchers called it Monday. If you are enjoying stories like this one, take a second and hit that like button and please subscribe. Your support helps us reach our first 1,000 subscribers, and it genuinely keeps these stories coming. Drop a comment too, because by the end of this, you will have an opinion about that cat. Now let us move forward up the ridge into the fog, and into the strangest week the Jura has ever kept quiet about. The Jura Mountains run along the western edge of Switzerland like a long green wave that never finished breaking. They are not the Alps. There are no white spires here, no glaciers, no postcard peaks. The Jura is older, lower, and far more patient. It is a long spine of limestone covered in spruce and silver fir and beech, folded into ridges and hollows. Cut through with pastures where the grass grows in stubborn tufts, and the wind never fully stops. To a survey officer of the Sethon Concordance, sitting far above the atmosphere and reading a set of numbers, the Jura looked like an ideal opening move. Survey Officer Bale presented it that way. Low population density, excellent flat clearings along the ridge tops, minimal military hardware within 200 kilometers, abundant timber, moderate temperatures. And according to the terrain map, a generous supply of surface water threading through the valleys. High Prefect Oram Vess studied the report with the calm of a man who had done this 11 times before, and had never once needed a second attempt. The Concordance did not conquer worlds the way most empires did. The Concordance conquered by being witnessed. Their doctrine was written in a document their officers simply called the Book of Appearances, and its central principle was almost elegant in its simplicity. Arrive in overwhelming numbers. Be seen clearly. Allow the local population one full day to understand exactly how outmatched they are. Accept the surrender that follows. It had worked every time. Fear, the book explained, is not created by damage. Fear is created by spectacle. Damage is expensive. Spectacle is free. Conditions on the target range, Bale said. Clear skies, long sight lines. Visibility across the entire ridge system. He was reading a scan taken in the middle of summer. They were landing in the middle of October. That was the first mistake. Because in autumn, the Jura does something that no scan had thought to record. Cold air settles into the lowlands, and the valley of the Swiss plateau fills up with fog, thick and white and absolutely level, until the low country vanishes under it, and only the ridges stand above. The locals have a name for it. They call it the Sea of Fog. It rolls in overnight, it sits for days, and it swallows sound, light, distance, and confidence in roughly that order. An empire whose entire strategy depended on being clearly visible was about to land inside a cloud. 900 meters up that ridge, in a low stone building with a steel roof and a woodpile that took 2 men a weekend to stack, 4 Americans were arguing about a coffee grinder. The building was called Ridge Station. Officially, it was a long-term wildlife monitoring post, jointly funded and internationally staffed. And its job was to track the Eurasian lynx across a stretch of forest, roughly, the size of a small American county. Unofficially, it was 3 researchers, 1 caretaker, a very old generator, and a shed full of equipment held together by patients. Ray Dunbar was the caretaker. He was 61 years old, built like a fence post, and had spent 30 years repairing forestry machinery back home in Montana before he came out here for what he described as a 2-year contract, and then simply never left. Ray did not care about lynx. Ray cared about water lines, roof screws, road grading, and the spring box up the slope that his Uncle Walt had helped him rebuild by hand, stone by stone, the year Ray arrived. That spring box was the only reason the station had drinking water at all. Nora Whitfield ran the science. She was 34, sharp, endlessly calm, and had given 12 years of her life to a single question. Where do the lynx go and why? Her answer lived on a hard drive in a fireproof case in the back room, and it was, by any measure, one of the most complete records of a large predator population anywhere in Europe. Gus Renner was 26 and handled the equipment, trail sensors, batteries, drone flights, data uploads. He talked constantly and fixed things faster than he talked. And down the road, where the forest opened onto pasture, Dot Kessler ran a 6-room mountain inn with a kitchen that fed hikers, foresters, and anyone else who came up the switchbacks. Under the inn, cut back into the limestone, was a cellar that stayed at exactly the right temperature all year long. Inside it, on wooden boards, sat 400 wheels of aging cheese. Dot was 63, wore reading glasses on a cord, and had once told a tour company that they could take their group somewhere else if they were going to be rude to her staff. That was the world the Concordance was about to walk into. But the reason this story is told at all, the reason there is anything to tell, was not the people. It was the lynx. The Eurasian lynx had disappeared from Switzerland entirely. Hunted out, crowded out, gone for well over a century. Then more than 50 years ago, a small number were brought back and released, and slowly, quietly, they spread. They found the Jura and they liked it. Deep forest, steep ground, thick cover, and roe deer everywhere. There were perhaps a few dozen adults in the whole range now. Each one held a territory that could stretch across 100 square kilometers or more. Each one hunted alone. And each one carried a coat pattern of dark spots that was as unique as a human fingerprint, which is exactly how Nora told them apart. One female used the ridge above Ridge Station. She was the reason Nora had stayed 12 years. She was roughly 6 years old, weighed about 23 kilograms, and had raised 3 litters in a rock pile that no human had ever found. Gus had named her, back when he first arrived, because her very first appearance on the trail's sensors had been logged at 4 in the morning at the start of a work week. And he had been the one who had to get up and check the feed. He had typed the file name in without thinking. Monday, the name stuck. It went into the database, it went into the reports. It went, eventually, into a Concordance threat log, where it would cause more institutional confusion than any weapon in the Jura. That evening, Ray stood outside with a mug in his hand and watched the valley below fill with white. The fog came up like water filling a bathtub, and by full dark, the whole lowland world was gone, and Ridge Station was an island above a flat white ocean. Ray had seen it 100 times. It never stopped being strange. What he had not seen before were the lights. They came down through the cloud layer in a long descending column, 30 of them, glowing hot and orange, absolutely magnificent, absolutely enormous. And absolutely invisible to anyone below 800 meters, because the fog swallowed every single one of them whole. The Concordance landed at 3 in the morning, in perfect formation, with full illumination, exactly as the Book of Appearances required. They landed into a wall of white so dense that the second ship could not see the first. Ground Captain T-Rex stood on his ramp with his arms out in the ceremonial posture of arrival and looked into approximately 4 meters of visible world. Somewhere out there, according to his instruments, 29 other ships had also opened their ramps and were also standing ceremonially in fog. "Report visibility," he said. "Visibility is the fog, sir. That is not a measurement. It is the only one available, sir." Up at Ridge Station, Ray Dunbar was awake because the generator had hiccuped. And he came out to find that the sky above the fog had a strange orange bruise in it, and the ground was humming through his boots. He went inside and knocked on Nora's door. "You need to come see this. Is it the Martin again? It is not the Martin." By first light, all 4 of them were standing on the ridge in coats and headlamps, looking down at something that should not have been possible. The fog had thinned just enough to show shapes, long dark hulls, ramps, movement. Gus said very quietly, "Okay, so that is not a helicopter." Nora did the most Nora thing possible. She went back inside, got a notebook, and started writing down what she could see in order with times. Ray went and checked on his spring box. That was where the second mistake began. The Concordance had come down expecting streams. Their coolant systems needed a lot of water, and their terrain map had shown blue lines everywhere across the Jura. So T-Rex sent a detachment down to the nearest marked watercourse with intake hoses, and the detachment came back 4 hours later and reported that the watercourse did not exist. "It is on the map," T-Rex said. "It is on the map, sir. It is not on the ground. Because the Jura is limestone, and limestone does not keep water. Rain falls, sinks straight down through cracks and fissures, and vanishes. The whole mountain is riddled with hollow passages, sinkholes, and caves. Water travels underground for kilometers, sometimes under the feet of people who have no idea it is there, and then comes back out somewhere far below in a single hard spring at the base of a cliff. The blue lines on the map were seasonal. In autumn, most of them were dry gravel. T-Rex engineers eventually found what they were looking for. A steady flow of clean, cold water coming out of a stone box on a hillside, feeding a pipe. That stone box was the one Ray and his Uncle Walt had rebuilt by hand. The engineers cracked the lid, dropped an intake in, and ran their hoses. Within an hour, the outflow at Ridge Station had turned to a brown trickle carrying a chemical film, and Ray Dunbar came up that slope faster than a 61-year-old man should be able to move. He arrived to find 9 armored soldiers around his spring, and he did not slow down. "Get off that," he said. The squad leader raised a weapon, activated a translator, and delivered the required concordance greeting. "Local, you are now under the protection of the Sethon Concordance. Observe our strength and do not resist." Ray looked at him, then at the hose, then at the film on the water. "Son, I do not care who you are. That is drinking water for 4 people and a hiking route. You are putting machine oil in it. You will observe our strength. I am observing your plumbing, and it is terrible." This exchange was recorded, transmitted, and later became a case study, because it contained the first documented instance of the phrase that would eventually break the entire operation. The soldier said, "Do you not fear us?" And Ray, who had already decided how his week was going, said, "I have not decided yet. Ask me after breakfast." He walked back down the hill, and the concordance let him go, because the Book of Appearances specified that day 1 was for being witnessed, not for engaging. By mid-morning, Prefect Vess had received his first situation report from the ground, and it contained 2 items he did not like. The first was that the fog was not lifting. The second was Analyst Pren's survey of the surrounding terrain, which stated that the region contained an extensive and highly developed surveillance network of unknown military origin. Pren had found the trail sensors. There were hundreds of them. Small weatherproof units strapped to trees at knee height along ridges, game paths, forestry roads, and saddles. Positioned with obvious expertise at exactly the points where anything moving through the forest would have to pass. They were unmarked, they were maintained. They covered an area of thousands of square kilometers. They were, of course, Nora's wildlife monitoring grid, built up over 12 years, 1 battery change at a time. Pren's conclusion was that the humans of this region had mapped every approach and had been quietly watching the concordance since the moment they touched down. Pren was not entirely wrong. Nora had already pulled the overnight feed and was going through it frame by frame with a mug of tea going cold beside her. "They walked past Unit 11 at 4:17, she said. 12 of them. And Unit 9 at 4:40, same group, different direction. They are patrolling in a rectangle." Gus leaned over. "How do you know it is the same group?" "Because they are all limping the same way. That slope is loose scree and they are wearing the wrong boots." Then she went quiet. "What?" She pointed at the corner of the frame from Unit 9. There, low to the ground, half behind a fallen beech, 2 ear tufts and 1 pale chest were caught in the infrared. Monday had come down off her ridge to see what all the noise was about. She did not run. She did not react. She was simply there in the same frame as an armed invasion force, watching them walk past from 11 meters away, and not one of the 12 soldiers had any idea she existed. Nora sat back slowly. "Oh," she said, "they are going to have such a bad week." Prefect Vess made a decision on the second day that was, on paper, completely correct. Since the fog was denying him visibility, he would create his own. He ordered a perimeter of signal beacons placed across the ridge system. Tall, bright, humming pillars that would burn through cloud, mark concordance territory, and give the local population something enormous and undeniable to look at. 90 beacons went up along the ridges, spaced through the forest at regular intervals, following the cleanest lines the terrain allowed. The cleanest lines the terrain allowed were, naturally, the game trails. The same game trails that roe deer had been using for centuries. The same game trails Nora's sensors were strapped to. And the same game trails that ran directly through the core of one lynx's established hunting territory, in October. At the exact point in the year when roe deer are moving most, and a lynx does the majority of her serious work. That was the third mistake. Nora understood what was about to happen before anyone else did, and she tried to explain it to Ray over dinner. "A lynx does not chase," she said. "That is the thing people get wrong. She is not fast over distance. She is not built for it. What she does is get close. She will spend an hour moving 20 meters. She will use every rock, every log, every dip in the ground, and she will not make a sound doing it, because her paws are wide and soft, and she places every single one. And when she is within about 20 meters, she goes, and it is over in 2 seconds. Ray chewed. And what does that have to do with those light poles? She has spent 6 years learning that ridge, every stone, every gap. They just built 90 warm, humming objects along her hunting routes, and put soldiers next to them who cannot see, cannot hear over their own equipment, and smell like their rations. And what do the rations smell like? Nora looked up. Meat, they smell like old meat. Gus got close to a crate. Ray put his fork down. They built a buffet. The beacons began disappearing on the 3rd night, not destroyed, not attacked. Disappearing. A soldier would report a beacon offline. A team would go to the position and find the mounting bracket bent, the unit gone, and a broad, shallow drag mark leading into thick cover. They would follow the drag mark for 30 or 40 meters and find the beacon lying under a heap of leaves, moss, and snapped branches, deliberately and carefully buried. Nobody in the concordance had any framework for this. Nora could have explained it in one sentence, and she did later to Gus. She caches, all lynx do. A roe deer is far more meat than she can eat in one sitting, so she covers the rest with leaf litter and comes back to it for 3 or 4 nights. She is not stealing their equipment. She thinks it is food, and she is putting it away properly. Ground Captain T-Rex report to orbit used none of those words. It said, and the record is preserved, that concordance property was being removed from concordance positions by an unidentified entity that left no tracks, no sound, and no thermal trail. And that morale in the perimeter units was declining. Analyst Prencross referenced the incidents against the intercepted human data and found that every affected position fell inside a single mapped territory boundary, and that this territory was labeled with one word. Monday, Pren logged it as the designation of a regional apex authority. The translation software, doing its honest best, added a note. Term also denotes the first working day of the local 7-day cycle, associated with reduced human cooperation. Vess read the entry twice. So this Monday holds the high ground and the population becomes hostile on its day. That appears to be the pattern, Prefect. Down at the inn, Kessler's week got worse. A supply lander came in low over the pasture, blind in the fog, and clipped the slope above the inn. It did not crash. It simply came down hard enough to shake the hill, and the old stone vault under the building cracked along its length. The cellar was cut back into the limestone. It held its own cool, damp air, and that air is exactly why cheese ages properly there. When the crack opened, cold cave air came through from somewhere deeper in the rock. The humidity swung, and Dot went down the steps with a flashlight and stood among 400 wheels of cheese, doing arithmetic that made her hands shake. 2 years of aging, 400 wheels, 6 local farms that supplied her milk. She came back up, wrote a number on the back of an order pad, and put it in her apron pocket. She kept that pad on her for the rest of the week. The real trouble came on the 4th morning, and it was not comedy. Gus went out with Ray to pull the memory units from 3 sensors before the fog closed in again. On the way back, a concordance patrol on the ridge above fired 2 rounds at movement in the trees, missed by a wide margin, and struck the limestone. Limestone does not take that well. The rock face split, a slab the size of a door slid free, and the thin soil crust over a dolline gave way underneath it. A dolline is a sinkhole. The Jura is full of them, some open and obvious, many hidden under a lid of moss and leaves. They funnel straight down into the drainage system of the mountain. Gus went down 11 meters and did not come back up. Ray got to the edge on his stomach, shouting, and heard, faintly, a voice from below, alive, talking. Then less good, saying that his leg was caught and that there was water moving somewhere down there and it was extremely cold. Ray keyed his radio. Nora. Sinkhole on the north traverse below the saddle. Gus is in it. He is talking. Bring the long rope and call Dot. Then he lay flat in the leaves 900 meters up a mountain, in a fog so thick he could not see his own truck. With 100 armed strangers on the ridge above him and one young man in the dark below him, and he understood that his week had stopped being about a spring box. Somewhere above the cloud layer, Prefect Vess authorized the deployment of the stalker frame. It was 4 meters tall. It walked. It carried a directed sound, emitter capable of producing a pressure wave that had emptied 3 cities without a single casualty. It was, without question, the most impressive thing the Concordance owned. And Vess ordered it to walk to the amphitheater cliffs at the head of the valley, where the acoustics were best, so that everyone in the Jura would finally hear him. Getting Gus out took 5 hours, and it took every single person on that mountain. Nora arrived with rope, a harness, and the entire contents of the station's first aid locker. Dot arrived 20 minutes later with 2 of her staff, 4 wool blankets, a thermos the size of a fire extinguisher, and Hank Bowers, a forestry contractor from Wisconsin who had a winch on the front of his skidder, and a truly heroic disregard for slopes. The Darling was the easy part to find and the hard part to enter. The opening was narrow, the walls were wet, and the floor 11 meters down was not a floor at all but a sloped rubble ramp leading into a passage where cold air moved. Ray went down first, because Ray weighed the least of the men who knew knots, and because he refused to discuss it. He found Gus wedged against a block with his lower leg pinned, soaked, shivering hard, and talking far too fast, which is what people do before they stop talking altogether. Ray got a blanket around him, got hot sweet tea into him, and then spent 40 minutes moving one rock at a time while Nora ran the rope from above, and Hank held tension with the winch. At one point, Gus said, through chattering teeth, Ray, "Is this the cave under Dot's cellar?" Ray looked at the passage going off into the dark and at the direction of the airflow, and he thought about a crack that had opened under an inn 400 meters away on the same hillside. "I would not bet against it," he said. That turned out to matter. They brought Gus up on a stretcher board at 2:30 in the afternoon, hypothermic, with a badly bruised leg that was somehow not broken. And Dot's kitchen became a recovery room with a wood stove running hot and a nurse from the village on the road up. Nobody cheered. They were all too tired. Hank sat on the step and drank soup and said one sentence, "Good. Now let us go be annoyed." And that is the part that eventually broke the Concordance, because up until that moment, Prefect Vess had been running an invasion. From that afternoon on, he was running a customer complaint department. The stalker frame reached the amphitheater cliffs at dusk. The cliff is a natural half-bowl of limestone, a great curved wall standing above forest, and it is famous for what it does to sound. A voice carries, a shout comes back. It is a stone theater built by water over 1,000,000 years. Vess had chosen it because it would amplify him. That was the 4th mistake. The Concordance emitter fired a descending pressure tone designed to fill open air. Open air was not what it got. It got a curved wall of hard rock at close range, and the wall did what walls do. It sent the wave straight back, folded it into itself, and returned it to the machine that made it, at a strength no one had modeled. The stalker frame's own sensors overloaded. Its balance system, which relied on acoustic feedback, lost its reference. 4 meters of walking armor took 2 extremely confident steps in a direction that was not available, and went down the scree slope on its side, gathering speed, and came to rest in a beech thicket at the bottom, upside down, still humming. The sound rolled out across the whole valley, and every cow in 3 pastures answered it with bells. The Concordance acoustic officer, a young specialist named Case, filed a report containing the sentence that Pren would later frame. It read, "The mountain returned it, and then the fog lifted." Not for long, 2 hours, maybe 3 at the end of the day, the way it sometimes does. The white ocean drained out of the valley, the ridges came clear, the light went gold and then pink across the limestone, and for the first time since arrival, the Sethon Concordance could see the world it had invaded. It saw a forest, it saw pasture, it saw a small inn with smoke coming out of the chimney and lights on in the kitchen. It saw a woman in an apron carrying a tray. It saw a man on a roof screwing down a loose panel. It saw a skidder hauling logs on a forest road, because Hank had a delivery due and no interest in renegotiating it. Prefect Vess came down to the surface himself. He had never done that on day 4 before. He usually did it on day 2 to accept a surrender. He walked to the inn in full ceremonial armor with an honor detail behind him in the last hour of daylight, and he stopped in the yard and waited to be feared. Dot Kessler came out, wiped her hands on her apron, and looked him up and down. "Are you eating, or are you here about the cellar?" Vess had prepared a speech. He did not use it. "I require the ranking authority of this region." Ray came around the corner of the building with a wrench in his hand. Nora came out behind Dot. Hank shut off the skidder and walked over. Gus watched from the window with a blanket around his shoulders and his leg up on a chair. 5 tired people in work clothes, 1 alien prefect, and a yard full of armor. "There is no ranking authority," Nora said. "There is a canton office, a forestry district, and a village council that meets when it feels like it. Then who commands the ridge?" Nora and Ray looked at each other. And Ray, who had been awake for 36 hours and had spent 5 of them underground, said the thing he would be quoted saying for the rest of his life. "Monday commands the ridge. And she does not take meetings." Prefect Oram Vess had conquered 11 worlds by being taken seriously. He now stood in a farmyard in the Jura, having been informed by a man holding a wrench that the territory belonged to something called Monday, and that Monday was unavailable. He did the only thing his doctrine allowed. He escalated. He ordered the entire ground force consolidated into one position on the high pasture above the inn. Generators up, floodlights burning, ships in a ring, everything the Concordance had. Arranged into one enormous unmistakable statement, to be delivered at dawn. He also ordered the reserve power cell brought up from the supply lander and staged on the pasture edge, ready to run the lights all night. The power cell traveled in a hardened crate. The hardened crate had been packed on the 3rd day, in a hurry, by a supply detail that had put it in with the field rations, because that was the only cargo sled available. It had been sitting against those rations for 2 days. It smelled to anything with a functioning nose, exactly like a deer that had been dead for about a week. That was the 5th mistake. Monday had been working that pasture edge her whole adult life. She came in at 9 minutes past 2 in the morning, from below in fog, through a stand of young firs, and she took her time the way she always did. 90 minutes to cross 200 meters. Not a sound, 2 sentries within 30 meters of her, neither of them ever knew. She reached the crate, put her weight into it, tipped it off the sled, and dragged it 18 meters into a hollow. Then she did what her species has done since long before there was anyone in the Jura to write it down. She buried it. Leaves, moss, torn branches, working methodically until the crate was completely covered. Then she went back up the ridge to sleep, with every intention of returning the following night. At 4 in the morning, the Concordance floodlights browned out and died, 1 bank at a time. And the greatest display of military spectacle in the history of the Sethon Concordance went dark 43 minutes before dawn. It got better. Ray Dunbar had spent 4 days thinking about limestone. He knew that his spring came out of a cliff face below the pasture. He knew, because he had walked it with Nora years ago, that the water reaching it fell into a sinkhole nearly a kilometer uphill and traveled underground. And he knew that the sinkhole had a stone slab lid on it that the forestry district had put there to stop cattle falling in. And that this slab was currently holding back a week of autumn rain that had nowhere else to go. He and Hank went up in the dark with a skidder and a chain. They did not flood anyone. Ray was very clear about that afterward. They simply moved the slab and let the mountain do what the mountain does. Water dropped into the karst, ran along the bedding planes it has used for 100,000 years, and came out at the base of the pasture in a spring that had been dry for a month. By sunrise, the lower third of the Concordance staging ground was a shallow, freezing, spreading sheet of water, and 11 pieces of grounded equipment were sitting in it up to the axles. And the ring of ships was standing in a bog. T-Rex engineers could not find a source because there was no source they could see. There was no stream. There was no rain. The water was simply arriving out of a hillside. Pren's report to Vess said the terrain was producing water without a visible mechanism, and that the ground itself appeared to be participating. Vess came down again after sunrise, and this time nobody was waiting to be impressed because everyone was busy. Hank was hauling logs. Dot was serving breakfast to two hikers who had come up the trail and asked, mildly, what the lights had been about. Nora was on the ridge changing batteries in her sensors with a Concordance patrol standing 20 meters away. Ray was on the roof of the inn with the wrench again. Vess stood in the yard and watched them for a long time. Analyst, he said, explain this. Pren had been preparing for the question for 2 days. Prefect. They are not looking at us. Continue. They have not stopped working, not once. We have taken their water, cracked their storehouse, damaged their equipment and occupied their high ground, and they have repaired, complained, filed, and continued. They do not treat us as an enemy. Then what do they treat us as? Pren hesitated because he knew how it would sound. Correction, Prefect, they treat us as weather. Vess looked at the ridge. At the fog coming back in below, at the wet pasture full of his own machines. Weather, he repeated. Weather does not require surrender, Prefect, it requires a coat. And it passes. Dot Kessler came out with the order pad from her apron and walked straight across the yard to a 400-year-old empire and held out a piece of paper with a number on it. Your ship cracked my cellar, 400 wheels, 6 farms, that is what it costs. Vess stared at the paper. You are presenting me with an invoice. I am presenting you with a bill. An invoice would be polite. Nora came down off the ridge then, and she was carrying something in a plastic bag, and she put it on the wall of the yard. It was a Concordance signal beacon, dented, wrapped in moss with 4 long parallel scratches down the housing. You're missing equipment, she said. It is all in caches within about a kilometer of the ridge line. She will bring more if you keep leaving it out. Vess looked at the scratches, then at her. Nora took out her tablet and turned it around and showed him a still frame from Unit 9, 4 days old. A pale chest, 2 black ear tufts. 2 eyes catching the infrared, 11 meters from a column of his own soldiers, with a bored expression that would follow Oram Vess for the rest of his career. That, Nora said, is Monday. She weighs 23 kilograms. She has never harmed a person in her life, and she never will. She is not defending this valley. She has not noticed she is in a war. Vess did not speak for a full 10 seconds. Then she is not a commander. No, Nora said, she is a cat. And she has beaten you 3 nights running. The Sethon Concordance withdrew from the Jura Mountains 2 days later, in stages, quietly, without a final address to the local population. There was no battle. That is the part people always find strange. In 6 days, nobody on that mountain fired a shot at an alien, and no alien seriously harmed a human being. The invasion did not collapse because it was defeated. It collapsed because it could not find anyone willing to be conquered, and because an empire built entirely on spectacle had landed in the one place on Earth where spectacle simply does not carry. The withdrawal itself was undignified. 11 vehicles had to be dug out of Ray's spring water. Hank pulled 4 of them with the skidder and charged for it, and got paid. In a metal alloy that a laboratory later valued high enough that Hank retired 2 years early, and still tells the story badly. Prefect Vess did one thing on his way out that his own officers did not expect. He paid Dot Kessler's bill. He came to the yard, in plain uniform without the ceremonial armor, and set a sealed case on the wall, and said that the Concordance did not damage stores it had not intended to take. Dot opened it, counted, closed it, and told him to sit down and gave him a bowl of soup. Because she had decided somewhere in the last 2 days that he was less an invader than a man having an extremely bad week at work. He ate it, the record does not say whether he liked it. Pren's log notes only that the prefect was quiet for some time afterward. Before he left, Vess asked Nora one final question. Why did she take the beacons and never take a soldier? And Nora gave him the answer that ended up doing more damage to Concordance doctrine than any weapon in the Jura. Because she is not interested in you. She hunts roe deer. She is smaller than you, she is outnumbered by you, and she has no reason to touch you. Your equipment smelled like food, so she stored it. That is all. You spent 6 days being humiliated by an animal that never once considered you an enemy. The Concordance classification entry for the region was filed by analyst Pren and remains. In the opinion of those who have seen it, the most honest document the Empire ever produced. Jura Range, Western Sector, Earth, do not land, terrain unsuitable. Water present but not where the maps place it. The ground is hollow and drinks what falls on it. Atmospheric conditions render all visual doctrine ineffective for a third of the local year. Population does not respond to display. Population responds to inconvenience and responds by continuing. Note, local wildlife includes at least one solitary predator, silent, unobserved, capable of removing equipment from guarded positions without detection. It does not roar. That is the entire point. It was designated Monday. Final note, it was never determined whether Monday is a creature or a day. Both interpretations produce the same result: a void. Life on the ridge went back to normal faster than anyone expected, which is the most Jura thing about the whole story. Gus was on crutches for 6 weeks and permanently unable to walk past a mossy hollow without testing it with a stick, which Nora considers an improvement. He also became slightly famous inside the station for having named the most successful defensive asset in European history by accident, at 4 in the morning while annoyed. Ray rebuilt the spring box a second time better with a locking lid and put a small brass plate on it with his uncle's name, which he had been meaning to do for 11 years. Dot's cellar was repaired and reopened. She lost 60 wheels and saved 340. She kept the sealed case, and she kept the order pad, and the pad is now framed on the wall of the dining room, where hikers ask about it and are told every time that it is just an old bill. And Nora Whitfield's 12 years of data, which the Concordance had classified as a military surveillance grid, went on doing what it had always done. It told the story of a forest. That winter, Unit 9 recorded a lynx at 4 in the morning, sitting upright in the snow on top of a bent Concordance beacon that the recovery teams had never found, cleaning one enormous paw. Entirely unbothered, in a place where her species had been gone for over 100 years, and had been brought back by people who thought it was worth trying. That frame is on the wall at Ridge Station now, next to Dot's bill. And that is really the point of all of this, more than the ships and the fog and the sinkhole. The Jura did not win because it was strong. The Jura won because it was patient and unimpressed, and full of things that had been quietly getting on with their lives for far longer than anyone had been watching. The lynx did not save anybody. She was simply there, doing exactly what a lynx does, and an empire that had never learned to look at something small and slow and silent walked straight into her ridge and lost. Nora put it best in the report she filed with the Canton office, which is a public document and which she wrote at 2 in the morning while laughing. They came here to be seen. In a forest, being seen is how you starve. If you enjoyed this one, do me a favor and leave a comment below. Tell me what you would have done in that valley, and tell me honestly, would you have paid Dot's bill? And if this story made you smile, share it with somebody who needs a good one today. It genuinely helps more than you know. Because somewhere up on a limestone ridge above a sea of white fog, there is a cat with tufted ears who has never once been afraid of anything from space. And in the records of a very embarrassed empire, her name is still filed under Monday.